Hello and welcome to Fossil Arcade. With the Capcom Home Arcade releasing on the 8th of November, Ben and I were able to go down to a hands-on preview event held by Koch Media. We played for just over 3 hours, testing every title and the system itself. The most important detail for most people is the £200 price tag, and whether or not that was justified was the biggest question we had when heading into this event. It's basically a plug-and-play console with 16 arcade games, including some usual suspects and a handful of kind of unknown titles as well. Alien vs Predator is one of the main attractions, with this being its first ever home release. Some of the games, the obscure ones, are surprisingly good. The ones I haven't heard of were the ones that kind of impressed me the most, because I think anybody who's interested in this, the target audience is probably going to own at least 5 or 6 of the more popular games already. So it'll be up to people whether they want to double dip or not on those.
There's one called Pro Gear, which I'd never even heard of, and it's very kind of Metal Slug aesthetic and that kind of vibe. Had it not been on there, I probably wouldn't have even known it existed.
When it comes to the hardware, the buttons and sticks have been produced by Sanwa, a very high-end arcade manufacturer. You can expect these components to endure a lifetime of use, and it's definitely where most of the money is being spent. The overall design is obviously quite contentious though. Personally, I really like it. Ben, on the other hand, was not so keen on the design, with the most favourable thing he had to say being that you didn't have to look at the console whilst playing the console.
Round 1, fight!
Don't die!
While we were there, we got to speak to some of the people who'd actually worked on the development of the home arcade. Apparently the licensing of the AVP port wasn't actually as tricky as you might think, with Fox jumping on board pretty much immediately. On the other hand, a few Capcom titles like Darkstalkers took a bit more negotiation due to the inclusion of legacy voice acting.
Capcom Sports Club, which was a last-minute addition to the machine. That was one I'd never heard of, Graeme had never heard of it, and that's fantastic multiplayer, and playing on the arcade with the arcade hardware was a real treat.
The Capcom Home Arcade is the first premium plug-and-play which includes Wi-Fi. This is primarily used for online leaderboards, though it was heavily implied that Koch Media is planning substantial firmware updates if the system is popular enough. My biggest issue from the day was that the UI still needs a lot of work. It's pretty clunky and not the most user-friendly design. The system is also missing some key arcade features which would have been included on dip switches on the original cabinets, which would allow you to set difficulty, damage ratios, what point limits provide a 1-up, that kind of thing.
That's sorely missed, because that's something you can get in like the beat 'em up bundle with the Switch collection and stuff like that.
I would hope that they would come in a firmware update, and that's certainly the impression we were given at the time. But yeah, don't know about extra games in the future. I would be surprised personally, but there was talk about it. There's room for natural progression with title updates, with the base unit including games like Street Fighter 2 instead of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. This seems like a pragmatic choice on the part of Koch Media and Capcom, as it deliberately leaves space for improvement. I would argue that going in hard with the best possible library at launch would have had a similar effect, but the overall collection is packed with quality games, some of which are basically unknown and well worth the inclusion. Personally, I would place quality of life improvements to the UI above additional games. Easier navigation and basic game options are a must for a system with this price tag. There's also no save states on the Capcom Home Arcade, which incurs a mandatory arcade feel, which not all players will necessarily want all of the time.
Considering they're based on the CPS boards, they really, you've got the world open to you with Capcom arcade machines, so it's a shame they couldn't get something like Dungeons and Dragons on there, but that could be a licensing thing, I'm not sure, but brawlers are really my thing, so I would have absolutely been happy to see any more on there.
There's also an external USB port on the back of the system, and it's something of an enigma, with no fixed purpose at launch. There was discussion that 2 home arcade systems could be linked together to provide 3 or 4 player gameplay, but again, this would require additional firmware updates. I would find the Capcom Home Arcade easier to recommend if there was more details on the potential updates Koch is planning. The system feels good and the game selection is quite strong, but it's missing a lot of quality of life options, things you wouldn't be wrong to expect given the price. With some more information on the future of its firmware, I'd say this was actually a very easy purchase for hardcore players. So thanks for watching this episode of Hostile Arcade. If you like this video, you can consider subscribing, and we'll see you next time.